The front line in the global war on terror is increasingly online as rogue states and terror extremists make daily attempts to destabilise our way of life. A massive hack attack, which has knocked out check-in systems at airports across Europe, appears to bear all the hallmarks of a state-sponsored cyber terrorism. Meanwhile, the murder of right-wing influencer Charlie Kirk has raised fears about the disturbing rise of political violence, all whipped up by social media. So, how big is the threat? Joining us now is Jonathan Hall, KC, the government's anti-terror czar. Good morning.
Morning.
Well, let's start with talking about these airport attacks, because people will have seen a lot of the reporting of them over the weekend, but it's not really clear exactly what's gone on. Is it fair to say that this could have been a state like Russia who is responsible for knocking out these systems?
I think the answer is anything is possible. And can I just sort of throw complexity into the mix? There are some very capable private entities, let's say in Russia or China, who won't necessarily be being directed by Russia or China. So it's not as if a member of the GRU is necessarily going into a company and saying, look, you've got the capability of knocking out some UK infrastructure, please go and do it now. It's also possible in this sort of ecosystem that exists in some of these countries that an entity carries out a hack and simply does it for patriotic reasons, or does it because they want to curry favour, or maybe there's some sort of informal relationship with them. So although we think, understandably, about states deciding to do things, it's also possible for very, very powerful and sophisticated private entities to do things as well. And one of the things that you'll see if you ever follow the National Cybersecurity Centre website, as I obviously do religiously, is when they try and attribute some of these attacks to entities that are connected. But often you'll find that the connection is not that strong. It could be as little as allowing it to happen. And of course, when a country like the UK might go to a country like China and say, look, could you please stop doing this? A country like China could say, well, it's nothing to do with us. It's deniable because it was carried out by a third party. So yes, it's possible that this is carried out directly by a state, but it's equally possible it be carried out by a private entity that is sort of allowed to operate and does it for a combination of public and private reasons.
It's really interesting, and also just demonstrates how incredibly complex it is and how difficult it is for governments and private companies to try and counter the threats that they face in those arenas. It's really interesting to hear you explain all that. It's kind of linked, I suppose, to the question about political violence, because there are some people who say that in the wake of what happened with Charlie Kirk, that Russia is sort of abusing and using this situation for its own ends. But some of that might not necessarily be done by the state. And some of that, I guess, might also be done by people who are supportive of President Putin.
Yeah, completely right. So you have this sort of phenomenon called patriots. So these are people, let's take the Chinese example. In China, there's a principle called United Front Work. And the Communist Party will put out messages about what you should do to support the great project in China, perhaps based upon what President Xi is saying. Now, you could have an entity that decides to do this sort of amplification of messaging, which makes a country like a democracy like the UK appear more unstable than it really is, not again because they've been tasked by the Communist Party, but because they're trying to do it just to advance the cause that they believe in, because they accept or agree with the propaganda that they've been fed. So that is completely possible. And I mean, personally, I find this really difficult speaking. Of course, I would always say to myself, well, most people think this, but I have to remind myself, I don't really know. I mean, I go on social media, I look at, the number of retweets that a particular comment has had, and I think, well, is that a measure of how popular it is in the country? And we know from a recent, really good report, actually, it's worth reading, that during the Scottish independence movement, 25% of pro-independence tweets were carried out by Iranian bots. And they knew that they were Iranian bots because after Israel attacked Iran, these same bots suddenly went silent and started tweeting pro-Iran propaganda. So it's really hard, I think, to get a handle. I mean, obviously political violence exists and we can discuss what it means, but working out what its scale is and whether people see it as acceptable is really difficult.
So how do you combat something like that in the UK then? Because it is obviously a worry, the idea of political violence and the idea of it being linked to the online world. What can really be done about it, either by politicians or anybody? And how concerned are you about it at the moment?
Well, I think the thing that really got me last year, there was an MP do you remember the SNP brought forward a motion on Gaza and the government managed to pull it because it was said that politically it would be inconvenient for the government. And there was an MP who stood up and said, "Mr. Speaker, I want to object because I need to make it clear to the constituents I have, because I've been threatened and my wife have been threatened, that I want to vote in favour of Gaza." And I mean, it seems to me that for that sort of thing, assuming that was coming direct threats to MPs from politicians, that really affects, doesn't it, democracy? And that, to my mind, that really goes into the heart of what terrorism is. And so one thing that you could do is not simply to say to MPs, well, you need to take greater security, you need to do things about your home, you need to change the way in which you travel to work, etc. Also, is in those really bad cases, actually using the stronger counterterrorism powers that exist to go after the perpetrators. That I think what the police would say is, well, there's a choice there. You could do that, but then you'd have to take the priority off other threats that are happening to people, like Islamist extremism.
I'm interested that you mention Islamist extremism, because one of the things that we have been talking about on this programme for the last couple of weeks now, partly because of what we're seeing happen in America, is the mix of religion and politics. And traditionally in this country, it doesn't traditionally happen in the mainstream. It is increasingly becoming a thing, though. Is that something that you could see affecting the way we talk about some of this stuff? Would you be concerned about it?
Well, I think that in a way we've all been a bit religiously illiterate. I mean, if you think about if you look at the world stats, how many terrorist deaths, the tens of thousands of deaths that are caused by terrorism, the vast majority are caused by Islamist extremist groups. And their ability to project or inspire violence in the West is why Islamist extremism is the greatest threat within our democracy at the moment. Now, those people really believe in what they are saying. I mean, there'll be some, if you like, some nationalist movements. You could perhaps make an argument that there are some groups that are really just focused on their territory, like, the Taliban is much more likely to be focused on their own territory of Afghanistan, whereas Al-Qaeda and Al-Shabaab have external attack planning desires. But the point is, they believe what they believe. And I think in the West, where we've become very secular, we find it quite hard to understand the motivations. And I mean, to some extent, I think this, if I can just go back to the sort of domestic, the terrible attack by Usman Khan at London Bridge, do you remember that?
Yeah.
I think there was a sort of misunderstanding that if Usman Khan was treated nicely by the people who were trying to sort of support him as a prisoner, he therefore wouldn't turn on them. And the reality is that if someone is really religiously extreme, it doesn't have to be Islamic, it could be any sort, but we're talking about Islam. If they're really extreme, it's quite hard for us to predict what they're going to do and the depth and the length to which they will go, because we don't really get religion.
Is there a concern that we could at some point be talking about Christian fundamentalist terrorism? We talk about it very easily with, Islamic fundamentalist terrorism. Is there a world in which we could be talking about this through the lens of Christian fundamentalism?
Yes, obviously. There was an attack, I think it was 2 years ago in Australia. It was a place beginning with W, and I can't really pronounce it, but it was on a farm. And police went to this farm. It was controlled by a sort of Christian cult. There was a terrible shootout. They lay in wait, ambushed the police and killed many local police in Australia. And that's chalked down in Australia as Christian terrorism. So, yes. And
you think that could happen here? Not necessarily that kind of attack, that to be clear, but that we could potentially see a risk of that here too.
Well, I don't know. I mean, the thing that is bothering me more at the moment is just sort of political violence.
Yes.
So people who've clearly made a decision, look, we could vote for this particular thing and we could conduct our debates about the environment, about Gaza, about whatever, just using normal democracy, but we've given up on it. And I think my greater worry at the moment is that sense that some people are beginning to say, whether they're encouraged by social media or not, we're giving up on democracy. We don't think that just protesting is getting our voices heard. So now we need to move to direct action. That's more my concern at the moment than Christian terrorism, but that's theoretically possible, of course.
Jonathan Hall, KC, many thanks for joining us on the programme. Great to hear from you.